Hi, welcome. I've never done the countdown before. I feel so fancy. How is everybody? Let me know if you can hear me or if there's anything weird happening tech-wise. That occurs to me. I did not put myself on Do Not Disturb. How are y'all doing this evening? Hi, Deb. How are you? It is good to be back live and writing again. Awesome. Good to hear. Thank you, Library Addict. So today, this evening, I wanted to do a live Build a Romantasy World. It's part workshop, part work session. So the idea is actually get some world building done on worlds. And let's see who we have here. We have Deb in the house and Library Addict. Always good to see and hear from y'all. Hello, Ms. WC Reader. Hi, Susan. Hello, hello. It's good to see. It's good to it's good to virtually hear from you, see you. It's so weird being live because I'm talking to the void, but I know I'm talking to y'all. Golden Angel, hey, what's going on? Oh my goodness, this is thank you, but this is like the after post wash hair. I did not have any energy to do anything with my hair, so it's flat twisted. Hi, we have celebrity guests in the house. Hi, Ms. Al. All right, awesome. So let me know. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the world that I am building, and I would love to hear what y'all are doing. Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad that you're here. Sharina, hi. Okay, so once again, I'm going to try to make this semi-work session, go through the process with a little bit of time for y'all to do some brainstorming and some planning. And the idea is I'll come on live Monday evenings in March to continue like building out the world. So we'll take the first steps tonight and then move forward with things. It is a great hairdo. It's very easy. I can't braid, but I can flat twist. So that is my behind the scenes thing. All right, so there's a couple of freebies that might be helpful as we go through the process. And let's see. If you want to access them, they are free for people who are subscribed to the Footnotes newsletter, but there's a bunch of them. So I think we're going to go through at least the world building checklist. We'll talk about that. And as we go through the world building process, some of the other freebies will come into play. So if you want to grab some of those, I will see if I can put them in the chat. Hello, SD. Hi, everyone. Hi, Teal. Hello again. Good to have you here. Thank you. So yeah, some of y'all who are, if you're in the course, we're kind of going through, like the process is the process, but sometimes it's cool to hear about it in different ways and see how people think about going through it. Okay, background. This is a world that I have written a couple of short stories in, the one that I'm going to be expanding and building out. But when I do a short story, I didn't spend a ton of time there. So I just feel like it's very anemic, and I want to expand the short story and continue writing in this world, continue the story that I wrote for an anthology last 2 years ago now. So it was 10,000 words. It was my gender swapped Red Riding Hood. And yeah, it takes place in a place called Elsewhere. So I want to go through the process and show you how I think about it, how I'm working on expanding this world, figuring out what other stories, because I don't have plots for stories necessarily. But my whole world building philosophy is that world building does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in connection with your plot and your characters. And that's my opinion about how it works the best. That's how I've been able to utilize it effectively. So while I'm building the world, I'm focusing on the actual world this time, because a lot of times I'm going back and forth in a very chaotic stream. But with the idea that this is a world that stories are going to happen in. And so the story construction and thinking about stories happening at the same time. So what I wanted to do, let's see, set up the story Bible. So if you want to let me know in the chat, if you are in a world that you have worked in, that you've thought about, maybe you don't have any stories told in that world yet, but it's been on your mind. Is this a brand new world that just like sprouted into your brain? Or do you have like a 5-book series there at that point? I don't know how much help this will be, but you never know. So let me know where you're starting from. I'm starting from a place that I know a little bit about, but again, the stories that I've told sort of are not in this world. They're people in our world who have experience with this world. So in expanding the short story, I'm actually going to dive into a place where, what I have now is just the outskirts of it. It's just like some mentions of it and some people who came from there. And so what I want to do tonight, let me share my screen. Okay. This is just a note. Some of the things, I don't know if we'll get to all this. We'll see how the energy flags, but set up the story Bible and just kind of record what you know about the world. Create a vision statement for the world. And if you are familiar with my course, or if you were with me for October last year, vision statements are important. Usually I do a vision statement for the story, but I'm thinking having it when I'm building a world that I want to sell potentially multiple stories in, it might be a good idea to do that. Thinking about the theme or the paradigm of the world, and then brainstorming some of the story elements. And this is sort of another key aspect. How can the world reflect or enhance the themes of the story? Now, I don't know the themes yet, but that is something that grows as we build this whole thing out. So Christian has storylines and has built the world mostly. Cool. Golden Angel. Oh, nice. Regency era version of Supernatural. That sounds so awesome. Torontonian. I assume that means Toronto. I've actually never heard of Torontonian. Okay. So I'm going to use Plotter for my story Bible. One of the freebies in the library is a story Bible guide so that you can create it in whatever software you might be using. I know some people are using things like Campfire. I have used Scrivener a lot of times. Word, pen and paper, Google Docs, a wiki, lots of options. But I'm going to walk through this in Plotter, and hopefully, whether you're using Plotter or not, you can follow along. We have Susan here starting a new romantic fantasy. Great. That's what we're here for. Yes, obviously, this is Romantasy. So the world and the story are going to be following the romance beats. We're going to come back to that. But, whether or not you're actually writing a Romantasy, the same general concepts apply. SD is doing a brand new fantasy world, and Jillian, okay, you wrote the first book in the series. That's kind of where I am, except it's a short story, so we're in good company. All right, let me bring up Plotter, and we'll just go through a little bit of setup and sort of how to organize things up front. Sometimes I go back and forth depending on how I'm feeling in terms of where I start. Let's see. I'm going to share Plotter. Okay. So the story that, what's the best way to see this? Well, it's kind of the same. The story that I have is called Her Majesty's Wolf. If you're not familiar with Plotter, it is, you have a project and you can have multiple books in the project. For now, I'm not going to use a timeline or outline. I'm simply using the notes, characters, and places section for story Bible building and building out. So if you were doing this, Scrivener is another way that I do this, or whatever software you're using. I like to have something where I can have multiple documents in it and I can categorize them in some way. So I've started here a little bit. And in the Story Bible Guide, which is available in the freebies, I kind of go through the way that I think about organizing the Story Bible. I'm going to try to have both of these windows up at the same time. So, okay, vision statement. Everything is blank. There's nothing in here yet. So I'm just going to set up a few of the documents. So I have a planning section, which is like, sometimes I call it pre-production, which involves things like the vision statement. I have a character list so that all of the characters are really easy to find. So I'm just going to put in the initial characters that I have for my short story. So we have Shawnee, who is our heroine, our wolf. She's a wolf shifter. Rowan, and then the grandmother, who is, and I can't remember how I spelled it, but can go back and fix it later. Also, sometimes I like to categorize them. So those are the good guys. So far I have some antagonists in this world. And I know that one of them is, oh no, I can't remember his name. I'll have to look up the usurper. We'll just call him that because I have to go find his name. So I do like to sometimes do protagonists and antagonists. And then all of these people would get their own, well, the people who need to would get their own entries in the character list. I mean, in the character section. So we've got notes in Plotter. We have characters, which has their own templates, and there's lots of templates to choose from, and then places. So I set up a place really quickly. This is one of the places that's in here. So it's called the Wandering Wood. It appears in the short story. I made categories for it. And let me know if I am going too fast or confusing. So each of these things can have categories, and that's one of the reasons why I like Plotter, and I like something that allows you to get kind of granular. So we've got in this story, I'm in the places section under categories. I've set up Mortal Lands, which is basically our world, and Elsewhere, which is my fantasy world, the one that I want to build out. One of the other places that I have in the Mortal Lands, let's make a new place, and we'll call it Everhollow, is the town where the actual short story kind of takes place. It's in the Mortal Lands. And, here I would just record other stuff I know about it. I'll put that the town where Rowan is from. Okay. It's kind of squashed because my screen is small, but hopefully you get the idea. And I went into DALL-E and made this image. The good thing about AI is you can create really cool images that can be inspirational. I have done this in the days before AI with just creating a Pinterest board, finding art from human beings. But, I'm not using this for anything, and no one's not getting paid for this. So it's just personal, inspirational use and I find it can be really helpful. So elsewhere in this story and the other stories that I've set, well, not all of them, but some of the other stories that I've set in Elsewhere, it's sort of my first foray into like the traditional, almost like, I don't want to say medieval, but pre-industrial kind of fantasy world. So in terms of, that's the level of technology that we're at, that I'm building out. So those are some of the only places that appeared in the short story. If I go back to my notes, I've got my vision statement, which I'm not quite ready for. I'm going to still be thinking about that. Character list. There was also another character that appeared in the short story. He was this bad guy, and that was General Dariston. So kind of go through what I have. If this is a brand new world, you're coming from a place, and you're coming from an idea, a story seed, an inspiration that lends itself towards something. So you probably know something. Like whatever you know about it, it's helpful to get it down. Now, a lot of times I won't put it directly in the story Bible, but at this stage of the game, when, these things are canon, because this short story has been out in the world for 2 years. And so I feel comfortable actually recording these things in the story Bible. I think those are all the main characters that I had. The next thing I would want to do, so we can actually go, do I have the story Bible? I do. Let me add this. This is the Story Bible guide. It's one of the freebies that you can download if you want to. And so this kind of goes through the things that I might want to include. So not ready for logline or blurb yet. Questions, to-do lists, character lists. I think I will make a questions section because I always have lots of questions that are helpful to figure out or to ask and to keep a note of. So I'll come back into here. I like to have emojis on these. So let's see, we'll make a questions file, and I'll find my little emoji website. Plotter doesn't have that thing that a lot of programs do, at least on the Mac, where you can right click and find emojis. So I just go to like one of the emoji sites, which actually is having an internal server error. So I won't worry about it right now. I'll come back in and add that. But it helps me, be able to see on the left side really quickly with a little icon. So what are some questions that I have right now? I have a lot of questions, but I'm not ready to write them down yet. So I like to have that there, actually, and it's not uncategorized. That's going to go into the planning section. So for the sections of the Story Bible, I use categories in Plotter, and that just gives you this nice delineation here. So we'll put that in planning. Let's make something that is from the world. So I have a category for the world already here. I'm going to make a new note, and we're going to call it magic. Put it into the world. Now, sometimes magic is its own category. For now, I'm going to leave it in world because I'm not sure if it needs its own category. If it needs its own category if there are multiple entries. At the moment, there's just one entry. And this is, again, just how I'm thinking about organizing things. So the only thing in the short story, we have the magic of shifters. There is this moon magic communication that I introduced that I probably will want to think more about. And there is the amethyst seal, which is another concept that was introduced in the short story that I'm going to have to flesh out and figure out the rules of. Sometimes when I write short stories, especially when they're kind of one-offs, like an anthology, I just, throw some stuff in there and figure it out a little bit later. But there are templates for magic systems that you can use. Let's see. I believe actually Plotter has a template for magic in here somewhere. But we can go over that later. It's got some great template things for when you are building things out like this. Still in the brain dump stage. So if I look back over at my story Bible planner, a to-do list, it's a little bit premature now because I'm still just brainstorming things. This is an idea for a character template. I start with the basics. I don't like to do hugely detailed character templates, especially not for the first draft. That confuses my brain. So we will keep moving. Now we get into groups. This, the Story Bible guide sort of expands upon the world building template. So it's got the same organizational system of world building in there. So now it's just a matter of, okay, what groups do I know exist in my world? And what do I know about them? Again, just sort of brain dumping things. So if I go back to Plotter, I am going to, let me see what my categories are. I'm going to make a category called groups. And then I think I'll just put a few entries in there. So we know we have the wolf shifters, which are the Lupican. And we're going to categorize them as groups. Can go make a cool image if I want. What do I know about them? They are people who shift into wolves, turn into wolves. I purposefully left the short story vague, so there's lots to fill in here. I do know that there's a soldier class, like the soldiers who guard the royals are all Lupican, as according to the short story. That's what's canon now. All right. And so this just gives me some guidelines. There are other groups that I mentioned that might not need their own entry. And so I'm going to actually, in planning, make another one for just a group overview and put that into planning. And I know that in the short story, I had the wolves. So I had the Lupican, wolves. I had Aviankin. I think that's what I called them, who are the birds. I had Ursican, who are the bears. And I might have had something else. Oh, I had Felican, who are cats. I also know that in this world, in other stories, I have introduced other creatures. So I don't know if they're going to come into play in whatever story, in the continuation of this short story, but fairies have been introduced as being in this world. Pixies live in this world. And I have to go and look at the other short stories to see what other creatures I've established. Oh, and I know that there are, what were they called? Breath witches in another version of the story. Okay. Let's see. So we can go through and record other things that we know in the world and continue building out the story Bible. What else do I want to put in? I don't know much about this. There's a little bit about the military in the first short story. Then we go into all the world building details. all this stuff, I don't know very much about it yet. I don't think we touched on religion, food. We already kind of talked a little bit about some of the creatures, if you want to call them that. Are there other creatures who are less sentient? No idea yet. Some of these other things, I would go through the short story and see what have I already introduced. Also, what am I interested in? And what do I think might be cool for this world? I'll just go through the rest of this quickly, and then we can move on to some other things. Let me know if you have any questions. So history, I do have a little bit of history, so let me go ahead and put that in there. And this is from the short story again. So let's see, how did I have this on here? Timeline and events. I think that's its own category. I think that's going to make the most sense. So I'm going to go into category and put in timeline and events. And then I'm going to make a note for history in that category. So I know in the short story 50 years ago, I think it was, I have to double check all of these details, but I just read the story like not too long ago. Of course, it's already blown away from my mind. Okay, the royals were overthrown by the usurper. And so then we have Lucretia, who was exiled into the mortal lands. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history. As I, build it out, more history will come to me, or I'll have to figure that stuff out. And then what else is important? Calendar, not yet. We've started with locations, still working on that. Magic, this is a template for creating a magic system. And I know that there is magic. I know that, for instance, I can go back into my magic here and say there was a little, I don't know how you say this word, Geas? I wrote it, but one of those things I wrote and I can't pronounce, but like a small spell attached to a bean, which was in the short story. And aside from shifting, there's also the heart seed, which was the sort of the point of that story. And that is like a magical seed that grants your heart's desire. So we have the beginnings of a magic system there. And then I think that's it. Yeah, the rest of this is research. Okay, so we have sort of dumped out a little bit of what we know, started organizing things. There's more organization to be done, of course. It's never done. But I feel good about like a lot of the stuff that I knew in the short story. There's some other details that I might want to keep track of. But those are the big points. Okay, so let's go back to, oh, this is interesting. Sorry, I didn't. All right, let me present the screen again for this checklist. Okay, set up the story Bible. Let's call that done. Record what you know about the world. It's basically done. Okay, a world vision statement. This is something that I think could be really interesting. And just to think about, like, what does your world mean? And specifically in terms of this, like how, if we think about the vision statement and the story that you want to tell, it's, if it's a romance, we're basing it on two or potentially more people falling in love. I'm going to stick with two, insert the number that applies to you here. And so what are the themes? I mean, there's obviously love conquers all. We might not know. I know that I ended the first story and I want to continue with that couple for at least the next story, maybe a little bit more. And what does it look like? What am I trying to say with the story beyond having a story about people falling in love? What does how is the world going to impact these characters? And I think these last three kind of check marks are all very linked because the idea of a theme or a paradigm for a world. So for me, that means different worlds have different sort of energies to them. And it might be the genre that you're writing in, or just sort of your theme as an author. Like we're all kind of interested in saying different things. So if I had to think about a theme like Earthsinger Chronicles, like my first series, which is epic fantasy romance, I don't know that I was thinking of a paradigm or a theme initially, but it came out of the writing, and it's about conflict, it's about interpersonal conflict, it's about finding your place in the world. Love stories are a great way to do that. You know, if you have an isolated character who doesn't feel at home anywhere, and then she finds acceptance with another person, she falls in love with him, but then she's not accepted in his world at all. And then the story becomes, and that's represented in the world in conflict, the war that's happening in Earthsinger Chronicles, for example. So when I talk about paradigm for the world, you know, in that story, I think the paradigm was, why don't people get along? Why do people hate each other? How can love conquer all, sort of, but in a slightly more realistic way? Because if you've read the whole series, I don't know if I'm saying that love conquers all. I don't think that's what I was saying. I think I was saying that love is wonderful and it can help a lot, but there's deep-seated issues that people have that maybe love's not quite enough to conquer. And these are things that you're probably not going to know at the beginning. I don't think I knew until deeper into it, but you can at least think about, like, what is, if it relates to the id list idea, if you're familiar with that, which is just a list of things that you love to read about, whether it's tropes or situations or character traits. What is going to be like the core of the thing pulling you through this story and this world? What fascinates you about this idea? The idea of the vision statement that I talk about for your story, that's the goal of it, to create a statement of your story to drive you through the hard times. When you get to the middle of the book and you are so sick of it and it's not working and you want to throw it away, what is going to be the thing that holds you in it and keeps you going forward? And so I think with a world, there is a way to ground it and to connect it to the stories that you will tell, especially when there's going to be multiple stories in that world. There might be a theme. So whether you know it or not, at least like have it in your mind so that, you know, you ask the question that you can't answer right now, but over the course of building the world and plotting or not plotting, writing the story in the world, if it's that seed of that idea of theme and paradigm are planted in your mind, then I think that you're primed to be able to sort of figure it out and flesh it out. So let me know if you have any questions about that, because I know it's kind of a tough concept, and it's a little esoteric, I guess, because theme always is a little bit. Okay. So I would like to, want to brainstorm, do like a little brainstorming session. And I know that, you know, some of you have mentioned the worlds that you're working on. Let's just take a few minutes to sort of brainstorm themes or paradigms and whatever that kind of means to you. Like, another example, if you were here for Preptober, I was talking a lot about Pushing Daisies, the TV show Pushing Daisies, which I loved, which was gone too soon. Let's take a moment to remember Pushing Daisies. And that is a, you know, kind of a unique fairy tale-ish world. If you're not familiar with the show, it was very stylized. It was like a 1950s aesthetic, bright colors, you know, everyone, the women were all wearing dresses and heels and, you know, pearls and things like that. The cars were old, but it was obviously not in the 50s. It was in an alternate time period that was very unique. So that world had a paradigm. That is the style of it, the look and feel of it, to offset the darkness of the theme, which was that the main character had the ability to bring people back to life for 60 seconds, and but if he touched them again, they were dead forever. So the people that he's touched and brought back to life, he can never touch again, or else they'll die forever. And this sort of inherent sadness and conflict, that romantic conflict was very intense. Like Pushing Daisies is just great, is a great example on so many different levels of things that you can do. So is the paradigm or the idea of the world to balance out some darkness? Are you writing a darker story that you want to juxtapose against something bright, or is the whole thing dark and everything is dead and gray and bleak? Yeah, so let's do a little bit of a brainstorming session. I'm going to put a few minutes onto the clock. There's a timer. I'm very proud of myself for finding. Let's do like 5 minutes of brainstorming and get some ideas down and see what we can come up with in terms of theme, paradigm, like vision statement for your world. We can kind of connect those concepts together. Did you all hear the beeping and the dinging? I just wondering how this works. Okay. I got some interesting stuff. We have some questions. Anime fan, hey. I think my trouble is making the fantasy world very different from the world I know. Well, it's only a problem if you find that to be a problem. There's plenty of fantasy worlds that are very similar to our own. Cool. Thanks, yeah. But yeah, if you really want it to be very different, then it can be super helpful to have that be grounded in something. Like what is one thing that can be very different for you? Like, is it a time period thing? Is it just magic? Is it creatures? Is it technology? Is it a little bit sci-fi where you've got some kind of interesting technology, or is it in the past where it's pre-industrial? What are your like? How are you entering this world? And then you can kind of figure out how different does it need to be. Is it an analog for everything that we're doing, but it is an underwater world or something, just off the top of my head. So you doing something that is allegorical with real life? Do you want to make connections? Do you want to hold up a mirror to the real world, or would you rather it be fun, whimsical? Like it really depends. There's so many different ways that you can do a fantasy world, um, but making it very different from the world that you know. I think that I'm trying to make it similar to the world, even as I'm trying to make it different, because you want people to have those touchstones. You want people to be able to recognize things that you're dealing with, even as you are throwing in something really cool and wondrous and magical at them. Does that make sense? Let me know if you let me know a little bit more about like how you're grounding things. That could help too. And Etori asked, does a theme need to be the same for every character in your world? Absolutely not. No. Like every character can be on their own journey. Um, you might have themes that are conflicting, which is a good thing, or resonating. If every single character has a completely different theme, that could be a little jumbled. But every character is going to have their own way of doing things and looking at things. I think in a cohesive story, though, even though they're having different aspects and ways of going about things and different concerns, it's probably going to be more cohesive if they are orbiting around a single star. If and again, you don't have to know it up front. You might not figure it out whether until after you finished writing and you look back on it. So maybe someone else has to kind of come in and tell you. An editor or a beta reader might say things that make you realize, oh, that's what I'm doing. But yeah, I think that characters naturally are going to have their own themes, and it depends on how consciously you do it. Even if you're doing it subconsciously, I think you'll find that it matches, it fits, because it's coming out of some whatever subject that you're dealing with, whatever issue or concept that you're dealing with. Ms.L71, question whether you should make it different or why you think it should be. Oh, right. That was probably for Anime Fan. And Golden Angel, more like historical urban fantasy based in our world with lots of supernatural fantasy in that world. I think that's really cool. Yeah. And yeah, we live in this world. So there are very few people who can come up with something completely wild and out there. And at that point, it's like, can people even read it and understand it? But like I'm thinking of the movie Arrival, where it's like a version of aliens we've never seen before, and it was amazing, but and maybe that's really common in that kind of sci-fi. I just don't read that kind of super hard conceptual theoretical sci-fi. But what I think most of us here are probably doing is not quite like that. So what I just came up with a bunch of questions. Like I don't have a theme yet. Sorry, I can only share with this thing. I have to kind of keep stopping and starting to share back and forth. But this is what I came up with. So I was just writing questions about the vision statement. And okay, what do I want this world to be? Like I kind of want it to be whimsical, magical, the original Wizard of Oz. That's sort of the vibe, like not the vibe, but the feeling, at least the feeling I had when I was a kid watching Wizard of Oz, where there's some darkness, there's some whimsy. It's definitely broken there. Maybe you don't want to live there, actually, because it's kind of not the best. But I have a character who's going to be the audience surrogate. Is this an allegory? What does being in a fairy tale world even mean? Like, is this a fairy tale? This was originally a Red Riding Hood story. I want to incorporate other fairy tales. I love Cinderella. I will read just about any Cinderella that exists. I want to do a Cinderella. I don't know what that's going to look like. How is this world that I'm building going to give me what I need to do other fairy tales? And what does being in a fairy tale world mean? It's not necessarily light. There's going to be war, and there's soldiers, and there's, dictators and usurpers, and there's 5 sons that are going to be fighting for the throne in a fairy tale world. So these are some questions that it's just like I have to think these things through and feel my way through the energy and the vibe of the world that I'm creating. I know my main character, Rowan, who's from our world, is going to go over there and be in over his head. He's going to be awestruck. He is a character who wanted adventure, and is going to get more adventure than he bargained for. Is there political intrigue? Is that the focus? Like, am I building up a place where it's going to be a lot of political intrigue? I like a good court intrigue, but I don't know how much I want to do that. Or do I? And then I have this concept of the amethyst seal that appeared in the short story that gives the royals their power. Is it too powerful? I think it is. As I was reading the short story, I was like, oh, this needs something. This needs kryptonite, like this needs a thing to oppose it. And having the antagonist have that thing is going to be very helpful. Charlene says, mine will be a Greek retelling involving Amazons being more in tune with the human world without losing their core purpose. So, yeah, like that feels like a cool theme. I like that. And if that's your vision statement, you have these touch points that you want to work on, and that's awesome. Grim, yeah, like grim fairy tales. I did a fair amount of research on at least the Red Riding Hood story before I wrote the short story. And I don't know that I want to go like the blood and chopping off feet route of, of various Grimm's fairy tales. Cinderella theme seems heavy on fantasy versus reality, like the reality of like the drudgery versus the fantasy of falling in love with a prince, maybe, or that whole life. And yeah, how do you? Cinderella still works, and people can do it in infinite number of ways. It can be fresh. Grimm meets Haven. Ooh, I did love Haven, and that is very intriguing. That's a great idea, Deb. So, anime fan, a story is kind of a mirror to the real world, but only in certain elements, such as oppression and certain historical parallels. There'll be magic of some sort, but no clue about the world. A terrible fear of making it too similar to what we're used to. A world with magic isn't what I'm going for. Our world with magic isn't what I'm going for. Yes, I understand. So looking at what you said earlier, it's a mirror to the real world, but only certain elements. So yeah, focus on the differences. Once you figure out your parallels, then where does it diverge? Is it sort of like not an alternate history, but what are the big things that are going to be very different from our world? Magic comes into play because that's obviously going to be very different. And how does it impact the character's world? What is your source of oppression? What are the historical parallels, and how are they playing out? It's really all in how you want to go about it. Like again, Earthsinger Chronicles is, people always say, oh, it's just like our world. And as I was writing it, yes, it was. There is a police shooting, essentially. There's a refugee crisis. It is our world. But, when you read that time period, the magic, the sort of cultural aspects, never underestimate how much culture makes a big difference. So it could be, a level of technology that's similar to ours, but if their cultural practices are extremely different and extremely foreign, that makes a big difference. I just saw Dune yesterday, and that's another thing where parallels, there's oppressors, there is colonialism, there are indigenous people fighting for their rights, but it does not feel like our world, but it mirrors conflicts and some of these parallels that you're kind of talking about in a way, because the culture is so different, or it's mashed up, and because it's on another world, and you've got this difference. I haven't read the books, to be very clear, but I know that even in the movies, they don't have computers, and they've had to. That's a big point of difference. It's a divergence. So how did they create all of this technology without computers? Can you do something? Find that point of divergence and build out from there. Extrapolate all the things that you're looking for from a big point of divergence, and then where do you find those connections and those similarities? Christian, mine will be a twist with element vibes of Princess Mononoke. Ooh, okay. That sounds very cool too. And yeah, I think also finding, like, someone was doing a Greek retelling, we talked about Cinderella, finding like a parallel story or inspiration. There are classic stories. So many stories that we watch are Shakespeare retellings or Greek retellings or fairy tale retellings, and you put your own spin on it and you remix it, and you don't even have to tell anybody that it was based on, you know, whatever fairy tale you want to do, the 12 Dancing Sisters or whatever. Like, but that can be another grounding point or a touchstone. That could be helpful if you're sort of searching for something to sort of hang the skin on the skeleton of, you know what I mean? How do you balance the cultural societal conflicts while still keeping the story a romance? That is a good question. Yeah. So, and that is something that I had, I think, on the checklist. Like, the last thing that I wanted to think about was types of romantic conflicts, tropes, and characters. And that goes to this question. So, this is a true romance. The main plot line in these is going to be whether these people are going to fall in love or how they are going to possibly make it when the forces of antagonism are trying to tear them apart. Depends on what kind of romance you want to do. That is your core. You're going to follow the romance beats and make sure that they're all there. But the thing that tears them apart, there's internal and there's external. With romances, ideally, you're going to have, it depends on the kind of romance, but especially with a fantasy romance. With fantasy romance, the external is very strong. In a contemporary, you can get away with most of the conflict being internal. Harder to do in a fantasy unless you're really going for that. So the things that tear them apart can be the society and the culture, or the bad guy, which can also kind of be connected to that. Like, I'm thinking of, this story, expanding it out. In the short story, my female wolf-shifting soldier meets the small town boy. I like cinnamon rolls. He's not going to be an alpha. Maybe I'll do an alpha one day. But okay, take them into this other world where he's an outsider who has sort of risen to power. He's basically found out he's the grandson of the queen, and he's got to take on the role of the throne after this coup that happened when his grandmother was deposed. So he comes in knowing nothing about this world, but has the power from this magic and his bloodline to rule over all of the people. There's inherent conflicts that can come about through that, but also, how do you construct the world? If that's a story where you have an outsider and an insider, do they hate outsiders? That's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. I did this in Savage City series. If you're an outsider, what does the culture and society feel about outsiders? How does the magic go into that? Is this magic he has, like I was thinking in my brainstorming, he's got this very powerful magic. Someone has to be able to oppose this. So he can't just come in and take over easily, and there's no conflict. So in a romance, I think it's especially fantasy romance, where it's very strong external plot. You've got antagonists who've got goals, and our protagonists have goals. You can have the two love interests be on the same team and working together against this foe, or you can layer on the conflict even more, where their goals are actually in conflict and you have an external antagonist, right? But at a certain point, and it depends how long the story is, in a big epic story, you can have all of these layers of conflict where they have to fight each other and then come together and then fight the big bad guy. But maintaining the romance with the conflict is knowing that all of your main beats, like the majority of your beats, are going to be the romance beats, and layering on top of those. Okay, at this point where, if you're familiar with the Romancing the Beat, Gwen Hayes, there's like adhesion, and then there's walk away, and there's no way. What is that no way? Like, I can't be with you early on. Like, we like each other, or maybe, you're still figuring it out. But at a certain point, you've got several points where they're torn apart. And how does the society and the external antagonist or the culture or the magic tear these people apart? And when you're building the world alongside the story, knowing what kind of story you want to tell in that world, you can build it from the ground up so that there's plenty of opportunities for you to craft uh, these things that are tearing this couple apart, while it's still a romance, because we're still focused on, them getting back together. And they can only, even if they have an external goal to do a thing, they can only do that thing if they're together, if they're no longer either being torn apart by others or no longer fighting their attraction, and like they give in, then they get the thing they need to win the external conflict. Would you suggest plotting the romance first? That really depends. I tend to actually plot the romance last. I always come up with a plot, and my very, very good friend Inez Johnson, I usually am talking to her about this, and she's romance first. And then she's like, well, where's the romance? I'm like, oh no, the romance is in there too. Like, they're falling in love while they're battling the dragons and, climbing the mountains. So it just depends on you. I can't really say. I think that most people, I don't know if most people would. I think it's probably 50-50. Who knows? Like, I want to tell the love story, but I'm always more interested in the external. But I know that I can only solve the external as the romance is solved. So they do end up being very linked, but it's perfectly fine. I think you can do it either way and be successful. It's just a matter of knowing what your habits are. And I think even my books that are romances are less romancy than other people's romances, just because I like external plot a lot. And I like that. I like the romance to serve the external plot, even as it's the core. Like, I get back to it, but I only get back to it once I have satiated my need to have lots of external things happening. And then the other thing, so in this vein, I think that there is one of the freebies is let's see, there's a story development workbook and the character development workbook. Which one did I want to talk about? Let's do story. I think that's the most relevant right now, because the story includes some world stuff. And so I'm going to show this briefly. I just said story, right? Okay, yeah. Story. Okay. So you can make a copy of this. If you have a vision statement for the story, that would be put in here. But this is where I would start thinking about the types of characters that I need, even in the romance. So, like, I'm thinking about, for this story, I've got my two main characters. They're going to come into this world. They need opposing force factors. They need people who hate outsiders, let's say, to be in conflict with my outsider character. They need people who are magically more powerful than Rowan. And there might need to be someone who's betraying someone. There's always betrayal is always good to throw in there. I don't know, like that. Betrayal is not a type of character, but that's a shorthand for me to understand that I need someone to betray someone else. And then of course we need allies. We need allies who are loyal to his family. Shani, who is my heroine, she needs allies. And maybe she also has people who are a little bit concerned about her in this new relationship she started. So Shani's friends, or maybe she has an ex. That's always nice to throw in there, who can cause some conflict. All these characters I'm thinking of, who is going to, needle cause the conflict and maybe be an ally and help them in some way in the future. What problems might my main character have? Not being accepted by those who he's going to rule, or he's supposed to rule. There are still the children of the usurper who still want power, things like that. Goals. I don't know exactly. I mean, he wants to help the people, but we're going to skip over that for now. And I like to figure out where my main character ends up. That helps know where I'm going. But that's character stuff. So the conflicts inherent in this world are also important to figure out. Like that goes to Deb's question about, conflict versus romance, keeping them in balance, whatever that balance might be. Your balance might, my balance might be 70-30, my balance might be 60-40. And that goes into the genre that you're writing and your level of interest in the genre. But the conflicts in the world, we know that there has been this coup and there were supporters and detractors, or I don't know what the actual right word for that is. Other conflicts in the world, it parallels what we were talking about with, hatred of outsiders, or suspicion of outsiders. And maybe there's suspicion of, the specific type of magic that he has. Other forces of antagonism, can list those out. And then, one of these, what makes this world unique and special? One of those questions where if you're concerned about the world being too like our own world, how is it different? What are the points of difference? So I know this particular section of Elsewhere is populated primarily by the animal shifters. But the royals are not animal shifters. And actually, that could be a force of antagonism. Maybe there is some sort of animosity for their specific type of power, their magic. How did they get their magic? Could some of these conflicts be what is standing in the way of my romance couple? And then what kind of stories can only take place in this world? That is another thing that I would try to figure out. If I want to like backtrack, or what is the word? Like get these other fairy tales in there, I would have to set up things for these fairy tales, figure out approximately how I want to approach them. First, what do I need for a Cinderella story? I need some kind of prince and royalty, and then I need, this underclass. We have class systems in most worlds, some sort of caste. What do I need if I want to do Rapunzel? Think about the fairy tales that I might want to tell, and then leave the world open enough that I can tell those. Similarly, whatever stories you're trying to tell, if you're doing like Greek retellings, okay, you're going to set up maybe the pantheon. How does that look in your world? What are these analogs? Those are the kinds of stories that you can tell there. And tropes, it's also a good time to think about, especially with romance, tropes. How am I going to overlay like fairy tales? If I'm doing fairy tale retellings, that gives me a lot of tropes, but the retellings, I'm changing them. I want to inject my favorite tropes, the things that I like to see in these stories. Why do I like Cinderella so much? And is there some other kind of trope? Can I do a Beauty and the Beast story? I love my second favorite fairy tales retelling. What do you need for all of those? Can they take place in the same world? When they do, what does that mean? How many different castles and princes do I need to set up for me to be able to do multiple fairy tales in this world? Things like that. That goes into the world building as well. Cool. So this is a good start. I think I got through most of the things I wanted to do in this session. Let me know if you have any other questions. Before we head out, or if anything was confusing. So thank you. You all are very welcome. I think the next, continue building the world and then start thinking about story a little bit more and connecting them together. Because like I said, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. I think these things do have to happen together, and figure out how big it needs to be, what questions you have, filling in the story Bible, all of that stuff. So I plan to be here next Monday again at 8 p.m. We'll do some more world building and some more story development. And if there's a notification, if you want to be on the list, I think it's live. I'm gonna put it in the chat. It's myimaginaryfriends.net/live if you want reminders, if you are forgetful like me. Oh, that's that. Golden says, my only problem is I want to work on this. Yeah, not what I'm supposed to be working on. This is my side project. So in the mornings, I work on something else. And ideally in the evenings, I rest my brain with something low stakes. And I just want to do these fairy tale retellings. But I get it. I totally understand. All right, y'all. I will hopefully see y'all next week or at some other time in the future. And have a good evening.